I should say a note now in case we forget later that after this session is our virtual happy hour. So just stay right here, same place, same camera, all that. And unless you go get a drink if you don't have one yet. And then we'll be able to continue the conversation, but also we'll bring more of our participants up and try and get to meet everyone and get a little bit more FaceTime, as it were. So with that, actually, I don't know if we discussed who was going first here, Rocco or Anthony?
Rocco.
No, I am here to obey.
Well,
you must know that
I command that you go first.
I am a student of Christopher. I learned from him a lot of what I know about American whiskey.
a lot. That means there's more. You've probably learned more since we were last together. You'll have to teach me some things.
No. But here I have some vodka. I have not whiskey here, but vodka I do. Polish vodka, of course, not Russian.
Oh. Apparently it's a theme. With the Polish vodka, I have stories about that. We'll maybe save for the happy hour. We'll invite you to begin on this topic of the rediscovery of the heart. Rocco. I turn it over to you. Anthony said you were going first.
Okay, I am going first. I obey. Well, nice to be here with you. COVID did not succeed in stopping the Hildebrand Project. And I compliment on Christopher and John Henry and the others who have organized this moment. I've been asked to say a few words on the place of the rediscovery of the heart within the history of modern philosophy. I think it is important in order to appreciate exactly what is the value of the heritage that von Hildebrand, not only von Hildebrand, also Edith Stein, Adolf Reinach, Max Scheler, Karol Wojtyła, to a certain extent, Edmund Husserl, first of all, have left to us. Let us start. Oh, by the way, I am Italian, I am a politician, so please stop me if I'm talking too much. You know, we are all too talkative. Politicians, Italians, professors are the worst of all. Let us start with Cartesio, Descartes. Descartes stands at the beginning of modern philosophy because it stands at the beginning of modern science. What is the great discovery of Descartes? Together with Fermat, Descartes has discovered analytical geometry. Analytical geometry is an instrument that allows you to describe exactly the movements of bodies in space. And through this capacity of describing exactly the movement of bodies in space, Descartes gives us the beginning of modern science. Modern physics cannot be imagined without this instrument. If you add the experimental method of Galileo, you have modern physics. Modern physics arises out of a kind of conjunction, Descartes, Fermat, on the one hand, on the other hand, Galileo. And this implies a tremendous break with the way of thinking of the ancients, with Aristotelian physics. In the physics of Aristotle, but not only in the physics of Aristotle, in the whole world of the ancients and of all other peoples of the earth, with the exception of the Cartesian peoples, North Americans, Europeans, Australians, and a few others. Nature is inhabited by forms, and forms means that everything has a kind of subjectivity. Everything has a form. This telephone, you see it, has a form. To have a form means that it has a destiny of its own, a subjectivity of its own, potentiality of its own, a capacity of expressing himself of its own. And the same holds true for springs and for forests and woods and the sea and the islands and the springs. Everything is full of the divine. The divine is dispersed in the nature. And the physics is a physics in which each physical object has an individuality and an interior law that moves it in reality, and also in space and time. Now, we enter into a world in which there is only pure matter, different quantitatives of matter that can be described. I can give you the dimension of this quantitative. I can design this quantitative of matter, homogeneous matter in line of principle, that move in space and time. And there are no more angels, no more devils, no more nymphs, no more dryads, no more all the wonderful, fantastic world of spirits that inhabited the ancient world disappear. With Christianity, they had not really disappeared. They had been transformed into angels and demons, good angels, bad angels. The divine was still inhabiting the world around us, although it was clearly distinguished into different armies in competition and in war with one another. Now we enter into a world of pure matter. Descartes was a good Catholic, and he asks himself the question, I have discovered a method to describe a world of pure objects. You know what is a pure object. The objects of Aristotle are not pure, they are impure. Why are they impure? Because they contain elements of subjectivity. Now you have a clear-cut distinction. Subjectivity on the one hand, objectivity on the other hand. Whatever intrusion of subjectivity in the world of objects is an epistemological obstacle. That is something that makes it impossible to make science. And we live in the age of science, and we don't want that. But Descartes, who was a good Catholic, asks himself the question, this method that I have invented is good also to understand the world of man, the world of subjects, because it is clear that subjects are not objects. Objects are objects. Okay. The method of modern science to understand the world of objects is perfect and has given us the power to control that world of pure objects and to subjugate it and to make of them instruments to fulfill our intentions, our demands, our needs. But can I understand also the world of man with the same conceptual methods or with similar conceptual methods? Is there a kind of analytical geometry of the human spirit? Descartes does not say yes. He does not say no. He asks the question and then dies. He was invited by the Queen Christina of Sweden to teach her the new philosophy, and he went, he was very well paid, he went to Stockholm to teach the Queen. You know, in Sweden it's very cold, and the Queen wanted to have classes at 5 in the morning, and the poor Descartes got a pneumonia and died. After Descartes, we have in the history of modern philosophy, Spinoza. The very title of the principal work of Spinoza, Etica More Geometrico Demonstrata, tells us that he answers yes. We can have a similar method that, similar to that of Descartes, that allows us to describe also the world of the human spirit. And the main line of modern philosophy goes from Descartes to Spinoza, then to Kant, Schelling, Hegel, Fichte, in the end, up to Karl Marx. In the period in which phenomenology is discovered, that is at the end of the 19th century, the dominating ideology among philosophers and scientists was a kind of neo-Kantian materialism, a mixture of positivism and neo-Kantism, in which of Kant is taken only the critique of pure reason, all the other aspects of his thought are set aside. And the idea is that we must create a unified vision of science. We have the science of physics, based on the Cartesian discovery. There is chemistry. Chemistry is based on physics. And then we have biology that is based on chemistry. And then we have psychology that must be based on biology. Anthony knows that Sigmund Freud, at the very beginning of his career, lived within this mentality. And there is a funny manuscript that was never published in his lifetime. The title is Entwurf einer Psychologie, an attempt at psychology, in which he tries to derive psychology from physiology, and the mediating instance is the sexual impulse. And but later Freud will discover that this does not work, and will discover that the psychoanalysis is based on the analysis of language, the way in which through language man represents himself to himself. But in any way, in the beginning, he was within this general mentality. And also Husserl, in his first attempts, tries to develop a psychology more or less clearly based upon biology. And Husserl also discovers that this is not possible. You cannot. By the way, a word in which you try to understand the world of subjects with the instruments of the world of objects is a word in which you try to reduce the human spirit to the movements of the cells in the human brain. In this way, you lose the capacity of seeing such fundamental human experiences like, well, we're speaking of the heart, our encounters, falling in love. Can you explain falling in love through analytical geometry, or even the analytical geometry of Spinoza? It is difficult. You need concepts that are adequate to a topic that is quite different from that of physics. And you need, what does it mean that you need instruments that are different? The positivist mentality sees clearly and rightly, they are perfectly correct in this, that modern science knows only two kinds of causality. You have the efficient causality, and you have the material causality. The physics of Aristotle knew two other kinds of causality: formal causality, the causality of the form, of the soul. The form is the soul, the interior element of movement of an object. Formal causality and final causalities. Things do not move because they have an end, but men do. If you want to understand man, you must reintroduce final causality and formal causality. Husserl opens up the possibility of seeing the world of man. It's not completely counted of this. This will become much more apparent in Scheler. Scheler is much more conscious of this fundamental philosophical discovery. He discovers the world of man, rediscovers the world of man in a critical way, not in the same way as Aristotle. When we discuss Aristotle today, usually we do not see him with the eyes of the Greek ancients. We see him more or less with our modern eyes of men, for which physics is totally distinct from metaphysics and from psychology, because things do not have souls, do not have forms, and do not have ends. But this was not the case for Aristotle. No? We rediscover finality, we rediscover the subjectivity not we, Scheler and with Scheler, von Hildebrand and Edith Stein and Carol Wojtyła and so forth, they rediscover the word of man and the concepts that are adequate to understand the word of man. But they do in a critical way in the sense that we know that there is a natural science. And we do not imagine that these concepts can be used to understand the world of nature. We know that these concepts are adequate to understand the world of man. What happens of metaphysics in this perspective? The old metaphysics dies because it was based, or at least there was the general conviction that it was based on the old physics. Physics and metaphysics were put in a connection, in a strict connection to one another. Even the word metaphysics in Greek means after the physics. The books of metaphysics came after the physics, and most people thought that if the physics of Aristotle dies, then also his metaphysics must die. And well, we shall not deal with the problem whether it is true or not. There are good arguments to say yes, good arguments to say no, and perhaps we will discuss this another time, but not today. What happens now? It happens that we have reintroduced these concepts to understand the world of man. And we know that there is the world of natural sciences, and there is the world of human sciences. Both these worlds have reality, are part of our reality. And the world of subjects has an objective existence in the sense that the world of subjects is not something that is based on the fantasy of each one of us, and we can invent our world the way in which we like. Anthony knows much better than me that this is not true. There is an objective structure, objective Gesetzmäßigkeiten. It's a German word that means laws, essential laws that govern our interior world. But nevertheless, it is the world of subjects that has a different structure. And then when we speak of metaphysics, we can draw on both these areas. And also in the field of metaphysics, then you have a new legitimation of the formal causality and of the final causality. You can derive this legitimation from physical sciences, but you can derive this legitimation from the human sciences. And since man is a part of reality, if you want to build up a metaphysics that is the expression of the totality of reality in the subjective side and in the objective side, then you have the right of reintroducing these elements of finality in the realm of metaphysics. My friend, our friend, Joseph Seifert, has written a very good book on being as person, in which he says that metaphysics should not be based on formal ontology. Formal ontology is a science that considers being as being. Being as it is ontos on, being in the aspect in which it is more purely being and only being. But we should build up a new kind of metaphysics based on the on-katexoken. On-katexoken means being in its more precious, more accomplished form. The metaphysics based on the ontoson, the pure ontology, is an ontology that unconsciously, I beg pardon for using this word, Anthony, I don't want to enter into your domain, to use your pure domain, but I dare say, unconsciously, they presuppose a world made of pure objects. Whilst a metaphysics that takes its starting point in the on-katexoken, that is in human being, man as the place in which you can enter into the mystery of being, in which the mystery of being, in whom the mystery of being is revealed with a level of brightness and clearness and depth that cannot be compared to the way in which being is revealed in objects. If you can build the metaphysics on the on-catexoken, then you, after phenomenology, and in part through phenomenology, you acquire not only a new vision of man, but also a new vision of being. You have a new philosophy of man and a new perception, a new conception of what being is. Now I stop here because I am eager to listen to Anthony, and later I am happy to answer questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Rocco. Anthony, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Well, we'll yes, we can. We'll just turn it straight over to you, and then we'll have questions at the end, as I'm sure there will be many.
Thank you, Rocco, for that truly inspiring and inspired talk. It was brilliant. Thank you. What can I add to that? I liked very much your account of Descartes and the catastrophe, in a sense, which happened then, the creation and the catastrophe that went with it. Descartes' project of becoming masters and possessors of the earth, which was taken over by psychology, psychoanalysis. I think you described something which Husserl, in his book on the crisis of the European sciences, later described as you talked about removing spirits or spirit from the earth. So you were left simply with space, time, matter. We aren't in that, and God isn't that. It's a denuded universe. And the act of doing that makes it possible to develop absolutely brilliant natural sciences and physical medicine and so on. But then, as you said, even with Descartes, the question arose, can we do something similar for human beings? Since we can develop this wonderful physical science, could we have something analogous for what we might call the human sciences? And but Husserl describes it beautifully, that having developed this dehumanized natural science, then people started trying, as you said, the analytical geometry, Descartes' Cartesian geometry. They started to try to regain the human by projecting back onto the human the dehumanized science which they had developed by extracting the human from it. So you've got a double move of dehumanizing and then trying to rehumanize by a dehumanized science. And this is simply not going to work. This is the catastrophe which these great thinkers like Husserl, Heidegger, Hildebrand, Scheler, Buber, they're all talking about this disaster which has happened to humanity. And I, in my profession, for 50 years, day in and day out, I see the effects of this catastrophe in my work. And I'm not talking about the so-called patients or clients, I'm talking about the professionals. We have a degraded human science, a degraded psychoanalysis, which, I mean, there's no time here to expound on the depths of depravity of this, this enterprise. I should make it clear that within the sphere of psychoanalysis and related so-called helping professions, there are many, many devoted, dedicated people doing truly loving and creative and helpful work and really helping people. But they are often crippled by something called theory. And so a lot of what they do is not because of their incredible theories, and I mean incredible, it's despite their theories. And part of what's wrong with their theories is understanding of what a theory is in the first place. They think a theory, they literally go to college, sort of psychotherapy college, and in the morning they learn something called theory, and in the afternoon they apply this theory to human beings. This is a completely alienated way of understanding theory. I mean, theory is the contemplation of practice. For the Greeks, it was, as I understand it, it was being aware of yourself as observed by the gods, and you observe what you are doing in the light of the gods' observation of you. And if you do this, then you become a theoretikos, a theoretical person, which doesn't mean somebody up in their head, but somebody using heart and all of their faculties to be aware of what they are doing. And this is what a true psychotherapist should be doing. And they're helping the people who come to them to become a true theoretician in the authentic sense, somebody who reflects on their life, and through reflecting leads a better, more godly, more holy, more loving, more heartfelt life. While I was while I was listening to the wonderful speakers in the slot before ours, it occurred to me to wonder how many times the word heart came up in Freud's famous Dora case, the first of his great case histories. There's reason for talking about this case. First of all, it was spoken about by Freud's biographer as a model for years for students of psychoanalysis. But Jones himself characterized Dora as a disagreeable creature who preferred revenge to love. So perhaps we can learn interesting things about love from the Dora case. And in fact, I was already aware that there are about 60 references to love in the case. If you look at Freud's, the concordance to Freud's works, it's quite touching how many references there are to Liebe or its cognates. There are hundreds of references to love in Freud's works. But when you look at how he actually uses the word love, something very odd and rather disquieting is going on. Well, as I say, it was easy to look up in the concordance how many references to heart there are in the Dora case, just while I was simultaneously watching the last slot. There are 3 references, and one of the references to heart is, the first one is that Dora says her brother says we should be glad that our father has found a woman who can be his mistress. Literally, it's the German expression is sort of hang his heart on. It's a rather low level of heart. The second one is that Freud moves in on Dora and accuses her, in effect, of being rather friendly with her father's mistress. Why is she not more? She's angry with her father for having an affair, but why is she not angry with the woman who she treats as her friend? And so Freud tries to persuade this young teenage girl that it's because she's got a lesbian fixation on this woman, and she's also incestuously bound up with her father. The third occurrence of heart in the Dora case is that Freud says the heart palpitations in hysteria I've always thought of as detached form, detachment from the act of copulation. So, I mean, what we're dealing, these references to heart have got nothing, virtually nothing whatever to do with what Scheler or von Hildebrand are talking about when they talk about heart. The most we could say about them is that they are part of what Yeats called the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. And R.D. Laing once criticized a Church of England bishop who wrote a book called Honest to God, and Laing was not very impressed with this book. It came out in the 60s, and Laing said, yes, we all have to begin with the foul rag and bone shop of the heart, but please God, not end there. And this is what he saw the Bishop of Woolwich as prepared to do. And this is what so many psychological helping professionals seem to me to be prepared to do. Hildebrand talked about the dethronement of truth. He wrote a wonderful essay, which is published in his book, The New Tower of Babel, on the dethronement of truth. There's dethronement of truth in Nazism, Marxism, and in psychoanalysis. My wife once, who is watching this, once suggested as the title of an essay when she was training in psychodynamic counseling that she would like to write an essay on the question of truth in psychodynamic counseling. She was told by her tutor that this was an inappropriate subject. Truth had no relevance in this sphere. And there will be many people, not just psychodynamic, but existential counselors and therapists whom I've taught, many generations of these people. Again and again, they are horrified that I speak seriously about truth. Similarly, they doubt whether there is such a phenomenon as love. Similarly, they doubt whether there is such a phenomenon as holiness. I mean, particularly holiness, which was important for Hildebrand and also for Heidegger, come to that. But the existential therapists are very, very contemptuous of this. The most that they will say is that it's comforting for their patients or their clients to think in this way. But of course, they know much better. I don't know whether you enthusiasts for Hildebrand realize just quite what a desolate world in many respects the world that I inhabit is. Why do I regard it as so desolate? Partly it's because I know that therapists can do better than this. I know that it's possible to help people to discover truth and love, the love of truth and true love and holiness, and that and I've been helped in my practice, despite my theoretical background being this reductive, alienated theoretical one. When my little daughter was 2 years old, we were in a bookshop, and she picked out a book from the bookshelf, a low shelf, a rather dull brown book. It was called Phenomenology of Intersubjectivity, and I looked at it, and it was about 3 philosophers. The first was Sartre, the phenomenology of loneliness. The second was Scheler, the phenomenology of, I think it said, of community. I can't remember. The third was a philosopher I'd never heard of. I mean, I had immersed myself in Sartre, and I'd read a certain amount of Scheler, and I was helped very much actually by both of them. But the third part of the book was about this other philosopher I'd never heard of, Dietrich von Hildebrand, The Phenomenology of Love. And I started reading this book and I bought it. And I've never looked back. It doesn't mean that I spend all my time reading Hildebrand, but from time to time I come back to him, and he's a kind of gold standard in this world, which is a sort of world which is set up in this foul rag and bone shop in which anything else is an illusion to be sneered at and scoffed at. So Hildebrand is, I'm a Jew, so I don't accept there's a lot of the Christian stuff I don't accept, but that doesn't matter. For me, Hildebrand is one of the greats because he, I was going to say believes in, but I'm not very keen on the word believe. He has faith in, he trusts truth and love and holiness. And this is absolutely crucial if one wants to be a psychotherapist. I think perhaps we'll go over to questions now. I can't hear anybody.
Not even
I am muted. Okay, there we go.
Now I can hear.
All right. Well, thank you both. I think we have a good few minutes here for questions. So let's turn to some of our submitted questions here. Paul M, and then Powell. We have a question from you, and then we have an anonymous question. I don't know who anonymous is, but Paul, are you able to join us? Oh, okay, Powell wants me to read his. Well, while we were waiting on kids are sleeping, I understand. Okay, here's Paul.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I can hear.
Paul.
Okay, thank you. So my question was that since metaphysics traditionally sees man in this fixed way as like a rational animal or something like that, would you say that phenomenology, which really tries to enter into this interiority, is opposed to metaphysics?
I will not say that. I will say that in traditional metaphysics, I mean, in classical metaphysics, this area of the interiority of man could not be seen clearly, exactly because the distinction between subject and object was not so sharp as we have it since Descartes. And the subjectivity, the human has been exiled from philosophy, not quite. There are proto-phenomenologists. Just a couple of hours ago, Maria has spoken about Pascal. Pascal is the anti-Spinoza. Pascal is the first one to say, no, you must look for a method to understand man. And this method to understand man is a method that implies that you strive towards the man who stands in front of you. And you cannot begin with abstract laws and reduce the individual to the abstract law. You must enter into a living connection with man. And I think that in the new metaphysics that can be built after this recovery of man is a metaphysics that is similar, but not quite the same as classical metaphysics. Exactly, because we have this enormous gain, the objectivity of the world of natural sciences. And on the other hand, we have this tremendous loss. That is the fact that we have lost the quality in reality. It is not just the human world, by the way. There might be a misconception on this point. Also the natural world. if you look to a mountain, well, a geologist can explain you the mountain according to modern science. But a poet has a quite legitimate right to see the mountain in another perspective. The poet has the right of seeing in the mountain the nymphs and the angels and the demons of the medieval vision of reality, because it is a legitimate vision of reality, not corresponding to that of modern science, but nevertheless, there is something true in it. The poet and the man in love, and. So I would say there is a communality of purpose and a communality of foundations, but the phenomenological method can enrich tremendously the scope of a new metaphysics.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is another question about the nymphs and the dryads, if you will. This is from the other Paul, whose children are sleeping. He suggests that maybe Descartes has not been read fairly, and maybe his the people who have attributed to him the spiritless world did so inaccurately, or at least inadequately, and that he does in his meditations. He's open to the creatio continua, and of course he has his argument for theism there. So is it perhaps the case that there has been simplistic understanding of Descartes that's entered into modern contemporary philosophy, and if so, why? And is there something we can do to help maybe retrieve or recover that?
Yes. Yeah.
Of course. I can list here on the spot at least 4 different interpretations of Descartes. And each one of them is a line that goes through modern philosophy and characterizes to a certain extent the national philosophy. You have the main line from Descartes to the Germans that ends with Marx. But you have also a line that goes to Pascal, and with Pascal to Malebranche, and then this line migrates to Italy, Vico, Rosmini, up to, well, I consider myself as the last representative of this line. And there's also the legitimate line of interpretation. And there is a third line that goes to Hume. Hume could have been, to a certain extent, a kind of Pascal, Anglo-Saxon, a Protestant Pascal, a Presbyterian Pascal, but they did not want. He realized he was moving in that direction, and he did not want to, so his philosophy remains a little bit confusing. And then there is even a line that goes through the philosophy of Southern Germany and the Austrian philosophy to Leibniz, Wolff, Bolzano, Brentano, and Husserl, because Husserl also recovers elements of this alternative line that had been defeated but not destroyed, not completely destroyed, and it survived. In this field of philosophy, you have philosophical positions that are considered as old, overcome by the progress of philosophy, almost forgotten, but they never die, and in different moments they can be resurrected. So no, of course, there are many different legitimate interpretations, and my interpretation is, I dare say, the interpretation that has become the most scientifically accredited since the 30s. There are 2 very important books, one of Laporte and the other one of Gouillet, who have reconstructed with a philological acrivy the real thought of Descartes. That is an open thought. That's the reason why it can be continued in different directions, interpreted in different ways. Because he himself did not make a final decision in his lifetime. When he died, his philosophy was an unfinished work.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe just one more. I want to ask a practical question. This is from Anonymous, so I will go ahead and ask it. Since many psychologists, psychotherapists, doctors, etc., don't have a proper anthropology, understanding of theory, value, truth, who can we trust in these domains? How can people seek out therapy or counseling in a world that is largely secular and misinformed about the nature and meaning of the person? Might it even risk greater detriment than help?
It might easily risk great detriment. There's a great risk of people being corrupted and seduced. Yes. But is this the same question that came up on the screen about the place of the heart in existential?
That is a different question, but if you would like to relate in your answer, that's just
well,
fine.
It's really all one, isn't it? It's the same question. It's almost exactly the same question. I would just say caveat emptor. People.
You must translate. Not everybody understands Latin now, unfortunately.
Buyer beware. You have the person buying psychotherapy, even if it's on the National Health Service, even if it's free, even if it's given by a charity. Don't go there cap in hand expecting to be handed out blessings. Go there with your wits about you. Don't go there in a paranoid way, but go there in a canny way. Be aware that there are many people in the profession, in the helping professions, who are probably more screwed up than you are. I'm saying this in all seriousness. So you have to look and use your wits and shop around and find somebody that you really click with and trust. And if you believe in truth and love and holiness, then don't be satisfied until you find somebody else who does. Because how can somebody who doesn't help you? How can they possibly help you? I mean, if you want to, I mean, the question of where you can find this in the voluminous literature of existential psychotherapy, most writings on existential therapy are much of a muchness. They're rather confused and confusing, but there are jewels to be found if you look. But I can't possibly give you a sort of reading list now of particular paragraphs or whatever. I think the same thing applies. Just use your own intelligence and sensibility and sensitivity and search and decide what you agree with. There are also nuggets and jewels to be found in Freud and Jung and Reich and many of the psychologists and psychoanalysts who actually officially proclaim a mechanistic ideology, but in practice, I mean, nobody can actually really keep truth and love and holiness down. So you'll find it emerging in the most improbable places. And so Freud from time to time will say wonderfully wise things, and I've learned a huge amount from Freud. So an encounter between a therapist and a client, it's not a question of finding a sort of wise person who's going to hand you something wise. It's a question of two people who've both got to keep their wits about them, and it's a sort of crucible within which something may develop or may not. But you have to keep your self-respect. Don't let the therapist beat you down. If he or she does, then that's the wrong therapist.
I hope that is helpful to everyone. We have a lot more questions just coming in now, but I don't think we have time to address them all at the moment, though I will say panelists, feel free to respond to them in the chats.